Welcome back to Santa Fe Fashion Week Fashion Behind the Curtain podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Cuomo. I'm really excited to have Skye on as our guest. Welcome to our show, Skye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into the fashion industry?
Sure. So I'm a legacy arts entrepreneur. I've owned five arts businesses. And ultimately, I started because I had started a black box theater and we were having an issue learning how to and acquiring costumes, how to make costumes. And so I started sewing schools and to train everybody to sew so that we could make our own costumes for the theater and save a little money. Quickly, my sewing school exploded and also turned into a small batch manufacturing plant, which had its own client base and following. And as I was trying to build a client base for my small batch manufacturing sewers, I had them start making dresses for me. And very, very quickly, I quit trying to acquire clients for the small batch manufacturing firm and instead just asked my staff to focus on my work. And once I had the bug, it just it all f- it all happened pretty quickly.
Where are you based out of?
I'm based out of Denver, Colorado.
That's interesting. So yeah, you found an issue, right? You needed small batch manufacturing, and now it's just strictly for your own business. Then
Right. And the industry business that I owned, factory fashion, I shut down for finally this past August. And so now I'm just a fashion designer and also an adjunct professor focused on my label.
fantastic. So tell us a little bit about that. So you're a professor in fashion design, then, or
Sure. So I have an MBA and I focus in mostly, I teach at Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design, and I focus mostly on the business side of the classes. I do teach design concept levels one and two, but primarily I'm teaching sustainability, I'm teaching industry, I'm teaching entrepreneurship, and I'm also teaching, like I said, design concept to young fashion design students.
so are these designers that already been kind of through the program of learning how to become a fashion designer, and now they want to learn the business side of it?
Well, I actually get them for their first class. And because I'm an entrepreneur and a fairly non traditional professor, uh, it's a pretty exciting first class because I work really hard to get them out in the community. I try to spend, half my time in the classroom lecturing, but the other half I actually spend out so that we're meeting people. They're going to beginning to understand the references and resources that they have out in the community, but getting real world practical experience.
That's interesting. So do your designers participate? Because I produce a fashion week. Do your designers participate in like pop up shops and fashion runway shows, things of that nature?
So I show fairly regularly, and regularly I mean once or twice a month around the year. So I show in Denver, definitely at Denver Fashion Week. Sometimes across multiple categories. I'll show on, in Western wear. I'll show in sustainability. I'll show in couture. I'll show in ready to wear. Have shown in Mommy and Me because I also have a youth teen label, but I show in quite a few categories during the week and then show both domestically and internationally. I've shown in Paris, London, New York, fashion weeks, and quite a few regional shows as well.
So it's a big part of your marketing plan. So are you selling wholesale? Are you selling directly to consumer? What's your business model?
Directly to consumer. And then I'm also the member of two art galleries. And so I have more avant garde pieces that I create, and those pieces typically sell through galleries.
Okay. I had a person on as guest last week, and we are talking about consignment. A lot of times I think, like my friends that are artists, a lot of times they'll hang their art somewhere, and then the gallery will take your commission. Is that kind of the way your fashion pieces are working?
It does, and I'm evolving the way that the pieces that I put into the galleries now. Before I had literally put pieces that had been on the runway onto mannequins in the gallery, but now I've stretched that out. So some of those pieces that are actually on mannequins, I'm revamping after the runway and putting them directly onto canvases and selling them too. So because they are large and awkward, it's not something that people typically buy to go to work in. They're not going to hop in their car in one of my large avant-garde pieces, but if they really like it, then I might transition it to a canvas and it might be something that actually hangs in their house.
That's interesting. I just had lunch with my friend Gerald Laribus, and he's an artist slash fashion designer. And then what do you call those motifs? So a lot of times he'll take his art and turn it into fashion. You're kind of doing it the opposite. You're taking your fashion, turning it into art.
Yeah, I can't stop myself from making flowers. You know, it sounds so cheeseball, and I promise I'm not a cheeseball, but I do make these really ornate flowers out of textiles, out of different kinds of fabric. And somewhere in my collection, one's going to show up. I've also done some fairly, and again, ornate avant-garde type butterflies. And these pieces are, they're just really big and really intricate, and so post runway, I've found myself sort of cutting, the large design part of it off and adhering it to canvas.
That's interesting. So we have spoke before, I'm thinking you're going to attend Santa Fe Fashion. I certainly hope so. But interesting, going forward, I want to do more of an immersive event, and I talk about how fashion is wearable art, and the days of the runway show, which I think runway shows are fine, but people
Yeah.
don't really get to see the fashion up close. And when you go to an art gallery, like seeing either your fashion or art on the wall, they don't bring the art to the people. They get to walk around and take in the art, take in your fashion pieces. What's your thoughts about that? I mean, you participate in a lot of runway shows. Do you see something like an immersive event makes sense?
Oh yeah. I mean, first of all, as an arts entrepreneur, I've always crossed, I've crossed music, theater, dance, and now fashion. And I've also produced fashion shows as well. And so, in general, if I'm going to produce a fashion show, it's going to be a non traditional show, and I'm going to try and incorporate all those elements. They're already incorporated, but they're often hidden, but I try to bring them to the front. I mean, I think the most interesting thing about runway versus putting my stuff in the gallery is, number one, if I were to rent a gallery space for a month, then it would be about comparable to what I spend to put something on the runway for just a few minutes. And so, part of what's been most surprising is just this opportunity to put something in a gallery for, 30 days to 45 days to even months. I had a bunch of pieces on display for 8 months at Denver International Airport and in various concourses, and the ability for people to see them, and like you said, not see them in the dark, see them in the light, walk around them, truly experience what it is. If it's something that's on the rack, they can actually take it off. Does that make sense? And so the experience piece of it is completely different.
That's interesting. So let's go back to talk about you do fashion shows all over the world, and you are selling directly to the consumer. How does that tie in? How are you leveraging the expense of going to Paris or any other part of the world, I guess, and then connecting directly with your consumer?
Yeah, I mean, that's the hardest part, right? The hardest part is, are the right people in the audience to connect to your consumer? Are the people in the audience going to connect with your work, especially if you're showing with multiple other designers? Um, I've done pretty well in that regard. But I've also been very strategic about making sure that I'm getting the right people into seats, and also that I have multiple lanes of traffic to transition back and forth. So if I'm going to Paris and I'm showing in Fashion Week, if Pete Nordstrom's not in the audience to see my work, then I'm definitely also going to be visiting some boutiques, trying to meet with private clients while I'm there and getting them into the seats so that they're seeing, that work and being marketed directly to.
So are you hoping, or I guess your plan is ideally selling maybe a piece or two directly to consumer at the show, and then maybe they become lifelong clients buying online?
Exactly. Exactly. I think other things have shaken out from that as well. Um, the art piece of it, adding the art galleries has been interesting because fashion, someone may love my runway work. They may love the piece that I have on the runway, but it might not be the right color. It might not be the right cut. It might be too short. It might be too long. And so sometimes those pieces can be customized and sometimes they can't based on the style. But the interesting thing about then, putting them onto a canvas is that person who loved it might then hang it on the wall, even though they would never wear something like that themselves in that color palette. And so I think that's another opportunity that has really opened to me that I wasn't expecting.
No, you bring up a very interesting point. So when you attend these different fashion shows, are you trying to find ones that you actually have direct contact with the consumer? Because I think a lot of the shows I've seen, they're runway shows, and especially shows like myself, they're regional shows, so you have to have more than one designer. And if the designers don't have a vendor booth, if you will, it's very hard to actually make that contact, right? You had a presentation, you showed your clothing, maybe you got some great photos and video, but there's really no way to have that conversation. Like the consumer can say, I really love that piece, but like you said, it's not the right color, right size. So do you try to find shows that you actually can talk with your consumer?
Sure. And when I first got started, I was just showing. I was trying to immerse myself, build content, trying to understand the market, trying to figure out where my people are. And that's the hard game of fashion, especially, the interesting thing about being a chameleon across a few different categories is that I can design a specific show for Aspen. I can design a specific show for Santa Fe. I can design a specific show in New Orleans. You know what I mean? And so I am trying to hit my consumers directly. Um, and sometimes it might just be me exploring the market and getting a reaction. And I will tell you, I'm always surprised by who buys my stuff. If I had to, when I do market research, um, no matter how valid it is, ultimately, the people who are buying my stuff are not people that I would expect. Right. Um, and so that part I think has been very interesting. And because I am a bit louder and a bit more ostentatious, even when I'm trying to be a classic,
Mhm.
I am a maximalist. I do very well in the South. And I also do very well with I call the blue hair, big glasses set, collectors, like people who aren't afraid to like put themselves out there. So that would be most surprising to me is that I would have thought I would have appealed to a younger demographic, and I do, but the younger demographic also doesn't always have the ready available funds to purchase. And so but back to your question, I think there's shows that do a really good job of structuring who's in the audience and who sees you. And I've even attended a show in Nebraska regularly. It's no longer in existence, but there was a show in Nebraska where they actually up on the monitor had a QR code that people could text you if they saw something right on the runway and buy it right off the runway. And that sounds really tacky, but I kept going back because I sold stuff off the runway. They literally would come back and take it right off the model. It didn't even matter, and then take it home. And so those sorts of shows are incredibly beneficial for designers.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate when I first started Santa Fe Fashion, and I've been doing it for over 10 years now, but not really understand where I fit, like I'd say the food chain of fashion weeks. And, you have, New York Fashion Week, which is very expensive for designers to participate.
Yeah,
I think it's more become, I was start off as press week, so I'm thinking it's more about the press. And then in
sure.
February, I'm going to Magic, which is a true trade show.
Yeah,
And then you have other regional fashion shows. So trying to understand, but one of my designers, Richard Hallmark, he was on Project Runway a lifetime ago. But he talked
sure.
about like my show's that perfect show and sell rather than show and tell because people have bought dresses off the runway, and now all of a sudden you have a piece that has a story behind it, right? So
Mm,
whoever bought that dress, people are gonna
right.
compliment that dress, and they say, "Yeah, I bought a Santa Fe Fashion." So I think there's a lot to that.
Yeah, I agree. And it's also, I mean, it's wonderful. Literally, you just go backstage and somebody's waiting for you. And so like I said, you go to shows for different reasons. And some shows I'm just showcasing and I'm creating art. Art Basel is a show where you're literally putting art on the runway and just, gaining following. But there's other shows that are much more strategic and targeted.
That's so how long have you had your label for?
So I started late. I am 52, which typically surprises people because I'm somehow getting away with looking a little bit younger. But I started, I one upped Vera Wang. Hold my beer, Vera Wang. I'm gonna get you. And started fashion designing at 48. And so I'm 52 now. Almost 5 years now of fashion designing. But in that time, I've put probably close to 600 pieces out there.
Oh.
So once I fell off that wagon, I fell off really hard and just went after it. And so even though I have a shorter time duration, I have the cred of a designer who's probably been in the market much longer.
Well, I'm a big believer, there's always talks of the 10,000 hour rule. People are aware
Yep.
of that, putting 10,000
Yep.
hours. But I also believe in skill stacking,
Sure.
right? Which just sounds like more like what you've done, right? You've had lots of skills in different
Mhm.
ventures and whatnot, and you're able to
Yeah.
build on those skills. It's not like you're starting from scratch, if you will. You took those
Yeah.
previous careers and built on that.
I did. And, and that's exactly what I call it. When I speak to students about it, I call it their toolkit. Like, don't turn down any opportunity. Don't close those doors because they lead to a diversity of thinking that could benefit you in whatever else you do. So yes, we are the sum of our experiences, and my experiences across industries are fairly vast. Even before my arts entrepreneur career, I was in corporate America, I was in politics, I was in, community outreach and transportation. Like, I've done a lot, and all of those fold into what I create, how I create it, and what I put on the runway.
It's interesting. Going back, I think your journey is very interesting because you started with theater, and then you saw a need um, for fashion, for what do you call that? Costumes, right?
Right.
And so then you need to make costumes. You really didn't have any background in fashion at that point, and then you started making costumes, and then to go out and I'm guessing buying sewing machines and cutting boards and all that stuff to start making fashion. I mean, that's really going in. And then somewhere along that journey, you said, "I'm going to launch my own brand."
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I actually start my first small business was a music school. And again, I've never played an instrument, never taken a lesson, even though I owned it for 12 years. And when I sold it, it's still in existence, but when I sold it, it had like 780 students. So it got really big really fast. But the theater started out of the music school. I had a bunch of vocal students who wanted performance opportunities, and I'm all about the full robust experience in anything you do. And so started doing, theater summer camps to give my vocal students an outlet, and then started a theater, and then through the theater started sewing, and then started the fashion, right? And then suddenly had a bunch of really fashion designers and costumers working for me teaching sewing classes as a side gig, and learned more about the industry and how the industry is really failing fashion designers, which is small batch. Really the game for fashion designers is, how much time do we have to create a garment? How quickly can we make it? How many can we make? And so there's not really a lot of opportunity for a designer who just wants five of something or three of something, which is, in this day and age, probably the most intelligent way to launch a line is to have a very small stock on hand so that you're not compiling things, and, you know, really almost consign so that people are ordering from you, and then you can either custom or have it made, but you're taking the money as you're giving the product away. This is a model that seems sustainable post COVID, especially as we're all still recovering from that supply chain disaster. You know what I mean?
Yes. I've talked to, one designer, I think she's out of Mexico, but she makes it quite clear on her website that it's gonna take time to get whatever you order, and I think a lot of times, with the world of Uber and, Instacart and Grubhub, whatever, everybody wants instant gratification, and Amazon, you get your stuff the same day or next day. But to be
Right.
very clear that sustainable is, you could argue it in different ways, but if you're not gonna order a bunch of clothing and have a huge risk, and then letting your customer know that this is basically being, it's not custom made, but it's basically being just made for that consumer, so it's
Right.
gonna take a little time.
Right. But I also think, sustainable is we're hugging trees, right? We're trying to do better for the earth, but sustainability for me also extends to the designer. You have to be a sustainable designer. You have to make enough money to survive. And so part of the sustainable strategy, um, should be, you know, helping you stay alive as a designer, helping make your processes more efficient, helping you save money on whatever materials you're buying. So, the social entrepreneurship of being a fashion designer that is sustainable should also be a good business practice. Um, in terms of your point about immediate gratification, it's definitely something that we all battle against. And to some extent, immediate gratification can be frustration over even a week delay. Like, what do you mean I'm not going to get it for 2 weeks? And the hardest part about private clients is often that, well, just a lack of understanding of how quickly you can whip something out for them, especially if you have to order fabric. I live in a place with one small fabric store,
Mm.
so 99% of the time, and this fabric store is wonderful, but 99% of the time I'm having to order fabric and wait for it. So my timelines, have to include that piece of it before I can even construct it, even if I could knock your garment out in a day. I still have to wait for all the pieces of the puzzle to arrive.
That's interesting. Go back to your journey. It reminds me a little bit of myself. So I was a stockbroker for a long time in Las Vegas,
Yeah.
Nevada, and then I tried my hand at land development. And when the real estate market crashed in Vegas, my mom's out here in Albuquerque, so she's like, I went to middle school, high school, and college here, but she's like, "Oh, I want to move back to Albuquerque," and I missed the Vegas. I wasn't a gambler, but I liked the nightlife, so I just was out one night. I'm like, I'm gonna start doing fast shows in nightclubs, and that's how it kind of started. It's just doing little fast shows in the
Yeah.
different nightclubs. The bar would pay me a little bit of money, but yeah, I was in my early 40s, and I knew that wasn't gonna be my passion. Then somebody put a bug in my ear when I produced a fashion week, so Santa Fe Fashion Week was available. But it's kind of like
Sure.
finding that need, and be honest with you, I knew how to produce a show, but it was at a bar. But going that next level to like producing a fashion week and getting the word out there, marketing. I mean, it's pretty interesting. But like, I guess you and I we see a need, and it's like, okay, we'll take care of that. I'm not gonna wait for
Yeah,
someone else to do
totally.
it. So
Yeah, let's just get it done. I started my music school. I have a 17-year-old son who's about to leave for college, and that's how that started. Again, I'm not a musician. I don't have legacy of music in my background, but he wanted to start piano at 3, and I had to find someone, and it was almost impossible. And then I didn't want to commute, so I didn't want to drive a really long time to get my kid to his piano lesson at 3 years old, and so I ended up starting my first music school in my house, and then it definitely ended up expanding and expanding. So super funny.
other parents wanted the same thing. So let's go back to the fashion side. So what is your design process? Can you walk us a little bit through that?
Sure. So there's a seed of an idea, and that idea could come from anywhere. It could be a fabric that I saw, it could be a song that I heard, it could be a painting, it could be just something that I saw that sparks the idea. I am fairly research based, so I then typically am looking for symbolically what that idea might mean. So, example, if my idea was butterfly, then I would be looking up, researching all the historical, um, both mythology and cultural identification around the butterfly. What does it mean out in the world? And in the case of the butterfly, there's a lot of social movements that identify themselves with the butterfly as well. But what are all those social movements? And so I usually begin with more of a sort of mystic, mythical, and social response to whatever it is I do, and that really furthers the collection and creates the story. Undergraduate, I have a creative writing degree, slash English lit major, and then a double major in Eastern philosophy. So, hashtag unemployed, but also definitely very interested in origin and myth and symbol and illusion, and definitely mostly interested in the story that I'm putting on the runway. So very important to me. The other piece that's most important to me, and typically when I'm designing, it can only get so far until I've picked the song, and the song is very gut reaction. It's right or wrong, and I can't move forward in my design process until the song, until I have the right music, because that really shapes the story. It also shapes the personality of, I feel the models, and the walk and the speed. Everything is determined by the music that I'm playing. And so until I find the right track, like I've been stalled sometimes
Mm,
for more than I like to be stalled. Just obsessively listening to music, trying to figure it out.
that's interesting. So how do you tie in? Because you're doing these shows, you're selling directly to consumer. Are you doing email marketing? Are you doing TikTok videos? How are you kind of connecting with your buyers?
So TikTok's not my jam. It should be my jam, but it's not. Definitely social media, definitely email marketing, definitely like I said, lots of research, but mostly social media, but not TikTok. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So
Um,
are you showing like behind the scenes of you, like the designer's journey, or like or photo shoots of the models? What kind of content would people find on your social media?
all of it. Like they'll hear some short interviews with me. They'll see backstage models. They'll see, I do let them in on the process while I'm designing. I do talk about what I'm doing, because I do think that especially if you're new to fashion, you're not really paying attention to the fact that we're trying to communicate with you more than this is a pretty dress. I'm really trying to tell you a story and I want you to understand the story. And so it's a pretty important to me that I'm, clocking my process and communicating it, and then also including all the other players into it. What goes into a music selection, what goes into, constructing a garment. And I do have, I'm a sewer, but obviously I came to it much later in life. And, I do have two technical sewers who work with me too, and they're part of the process too. And I want to make sure they're visible as well within my process.
That's so important. I think you hear a lot about like world building and storytelling, and I think a lot of creatives, um, maybe they are shy. I don't know what I'm looking for, right? But they think their work should speak for themselves, but it really can't speak for itself, right? They really need to hear your words and be able to connect to the fashion, because otherwise, how are you going to compete in such with such large designers and large manufacturers?
Well, too, and I think because I'm an avant-garde designer, primarily, and my runway is very theatrical. My runway is never plain. And the only time I've got plain things on the runway is if I just exhausted you with the piece before, and I think you need a break before the next big piece that comes out and knocks you out. But um, I definitely think that the story is important. And because I'm avant-garde, sometimes my newspaper reviews will be like, Skye, created a beautiful collection with a bunch of weird creatures in it. And I'm like, but they're butterflies. You know what I mean? So I think that part is pretty important. I think it's pretty important for me to do the media circuit and tell people what I'm doing. And also pretty important for me to be visible during the process, explaining what this means to me. Because I think once you fully, there's a story, you may not fully understand what I'm doing, but I do want you to understand my perspective on it and still have your own reaction to it.
That's cool. So, what are your price points like for your pieces?
So I want to be accessible. So typically, I mean, I have things that are incredibly affordable. I have things under 100, and that's new. Part of what I learned in art galleries is that it's always important to have accessories or some pieces that anyone can buy. And so I'll have pieces. I just did a holiday sale at one of my galleries, which is literally a sales event. It's not just and not just an exhibition, but a sales event we're selling. And so in that, I will have, accessories or smaller scale things that go anywhere from 45 to, 150. And then my other price points really probably begin closer to 350 and can go up. But I'm not someone who's selling things for $6,000. That's not to suggest that I don't make pieces that might could sell for that. But if I'm creating something along those lines, I'm typically keeping it for myself because I get a lot of traction out of it. That would be something that I'm photographing over and over and over again, and lending to photographers or hair and makeup people into different environments, both domestically and internationally, so that I'm getting as much run out of the dress as I can, in different ways. And that's much more interesting to me than, a big paycheck. I am interested in the big paycheck, for the
Mhm.
record, but at the same time, like when I really do the math, like a lot of times I get a lot more traction out of a bigger piece by not selling it.
That's interesting. So, you're selling directly to consumer. You're doing fast shows. You're doing pop up shops. And I talked to a designer the other day, and she's kind of going back a little bit to wholesale, but she's in New York, and so she's really working in those different neighborhoods that she's based out of. What I thought was interesting is she doesn't have a seller's rep, which would be very expensive to have a seller's rep, right? But
Right.
if one piece isn't selling well in Manhattan, let's say, but might sell well in another um, borough, I'm originally from New York, another
Yeah.
borough, let's say, she's able to pull that piece, maybe take it to the other store and swap them out and stuff like that, which I thought was interesting. But going back to like, it seems like you do a lot of legwork before you attend a show, and you're finding boutiques that might work for you at different, maybe outside things. Can you kind of walk us through what that process is like for you?
Of finding the audience.
The audience, but also it sounds like when you go to do a show in a certain city, you might hook up with a boutique there and maybe do a pop up or something like that. Did I understand that correctly?
Sure. So a lot of times I'm starting with a producer. I'm literally asking, like, this is my work. Do you have any recommendations? because they know the economy. They know the full economy. Hopefully, if they're putting on a fashion week, they know where all the nooks and crannies are. Um, I am also reaching into my art community at that point. I'm reaching into the boutique community at that point. Typically, designers like me, we don't end up in Nordstrom. We might, but I do still reach out to stylists. I do still reach out to um, photographers in the area and try to identify who I'm selling to. So stylists are great because they may be a stylist who works at Nordstrom, but understands which clients might be interested in signature pieces from me. So stylists, photographers, boutique owners, producers, and then the art network is typically what I hit first. And it depends on how much time I'm going to be in for the show too. A lot of times I'm a weekend warrior. I'm coming in on Friday, I'm doing a bunch of fittings on Friday, I have a show on Saturday, and I'm out on Sunday. So it depends on the market too. Not all shows do I have the luxury of spending that much time in order to like really shop my wares into the boutiques, but I might drop by, I might show my lookbook, and then I might follow up with them after.
Are you notifying maybe via social media or email to let people know you're showing in any given city? So it's almost like being a rock star and like, oh, I'm playing a show this weekend. Come see me.
Yeah, yeah. I'm definitely publishing a calendar both on my website and also on social. I will have a full list regularly of where I'm showing. So, yes, you can come catch me. And it's interesting because I think because of that, a lot of times if I do a casting call, like I'll have models from Paris reach out to me and be like, "I'd love to walk for you." And I'm like, "Do you know I'm doing this show in Denver? Like, do you, are you prepared to travel?" Or I'll do a model casting call and someone will show up from Albuquerque, right?
Mhm.
I've had quite a few models come in from Santa Fe and the Albuquerque area, and model in like Aspen and some of my other shows because they're interested in working with me, and they're paying attention. So that part is really interesting, I think, as well. I'm a fairly diverse designer, and I've had clients. I've dressed people for galas. I've dressed a male exotic dancer. I've made a giant empanada. Like I've dressed some of the Denver Bronco players. Like it's interesting in this business how many people we come across, and and have the opportunity to work with and dress, and they've all been really interesting experiences. So don't be afraid to reach out to a designer and tell them you have a vision, or ask them who do you think I am? What do you think I should be wearing? Because I think those processes of exploration are really interesting. Um, and it's probably more affordable than you think.
Okay, let me tip this question because I had this conversation. So let me back up a bit here, and then we'll edit this in. Yesterday, I had coffee with a couple of film friends here in Albuquerque, and an aspiring designer. I think she's doing more like repurposing things, right? So she'll go to a thrift store and bedazzle it and stuff like that. But her background is actually burlesque, and so I think interesting. I think back in Florida, like making costumes for herself and for burlesque performers,
Sure.
and she's trying to figure out this whole thing of becoming a fashion designer. And of course, if you're, I don't know, I don't mean to be disrespectful saying bedazzling, but those got to be one-off pieces, right? There's no way to mass produce those. You go out and you make something, but trying to um, explain to your consumer what it is that you make. Are you making burlesque costumes? She's talked about lingerie, but she's also dazzling stuff like that. And like you said, unless you're working with a micro manufacturer, how do you pull all that off? And when you first started, and when you're talking to your students, how are you talking to your students about that? Or when you first started, did you try to make a little bit of everything, or how would you kind of go into the business?
I mean, I think because of my background, I'm naturally diverse anyway. And so people have come to me through a lot of different channels. But what I consistently tell my students is to not quickly shut the door on anything. Right. So if I go back to my experience with a male exotic dancer who came to me because he knew I made avant garde stuff and was about to compete in London and wanted this like avant garde tree outfit, he had a concept. And what I learned from that experience was I learned a lot, first of all. first to not call him a stripper, and instead he's a male exotic dancer and he's got a profession.
Mhm.
But I also learned a lot about magnets, right? Through that research process. I learned a lot about snaps. I learned a lot about magnets. I learned a lot about, ruching, because this is someone who has to be able to pull clothes off very strategically. And the extensive research I did into magnets to create his costume led me to work with a bunch of adaptive clients,
Mm.
who have disabilities. One who has Parkinson's, one who's in a wheelchair, because they're really doing some of the same stuff. They have the same need in how they get the clothes on and off as my exotic dancer. And so I would just say, don't be quick to shut those doors.
Mm.
Like, explore. The other really big learning experience I had was I don't really do menswear. Um, uh, and when I had to design for the two Denver Broncos, who were just huge, these people are huge. My little tape measure, when I showed up to measure them, didn't reach, the pinpoints from top of the head to inseam that it had to. Like, I had to do math in order to
Mm.
measure them. But just understanding bodies and muscle and how muscle works and how it interacts with their clothing, like the information that I learned there allowed me to design for some drag queens. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
And so, uh, I wouldn't shut the door on opportunity. And I would also be open to different kinds of design. Like, you learn a lot from a costumer. You can learn a lot about clothing from a costumer. And especially if you're avant garde, you can learn insane amounts from a costumer. You can learn a lot from someone who does workwear, you know? And so I've really been voracious in trying to work with as many people as possible, because they do diversify my knowledge base and give me solutions that my tech sewers don't have. Right? They're trained in a very linear fashion, and I'm grateful for that. They're fast and they're precise. But when I'm like, hey, we're going to make a big tree thing, they don't know what to do with that. And I'm the pattern maker in that situation, as someone who has much less experience than them. So, take on as much as you explore, as much as you can, I
Well,
guess,
I
would
think
be
what
my advice.
no, I think what's interesting is if you actually, as a designer, business owner, and you're sharing your journey on social media, and then let's say maybe your big business is manufacturing, and you got that label and brand, but by the way, on your videos, you're also showing that you're making something for a burlesque dancer, for her example, whatever. So if they see
Yeah,
you doing that, then all of a sudden, like, oh, I remember that she also makes this, and you can
right.
get referrals. So if you're almost like top of mind, maybe letting them know, drip that out every so often that you're also making this kind of stuff. So when that opportunity comes across, like, oh yeah, she's really known for this, but she also does that, and so
Right.
that
Or
might be a
she
good way to,
could.
or she could
Or
do
she
that.
could, like, I'm not a costumer, but the Denver Bronco contract came to me through a publicist. A publicist saw me do something, weird, and was like, "Oh, she could probably make something weird." You know what I mean? And the items that I were making for the Denver Broncos were two costumes that they were going to wear to a Halloween party, that they were very militant about looking exactly like the characters they wanted to. And so I had to hand make everything. And so you never know who's in the audience. You never know who's watching. And, your reach, sometimes it's just about people understanding that you can do a lot of stuff, to your point. Like, I could do a lot of stuff. And I also don't have ego about doing a lot of stuff. Like, I'm definitely not going to look down on anyone who brings me an opportunity, whatever it is, and will bring as much to it as I can. So,
That's great. Well, with that said, it kind of circles back to what you said earlier about being a sustainable fashion designer. And I think being in business long enough to keep the lights on. So when those
exactly.
opportunities come across or come about, you can actually deliver on those
Right. And
skills.
you never know. I mean, COVID happened, it spanked us all. Who knew that was going to happen? You never know what's going to happen. And if your sustainability is, I'm now going to reach into this community that I never thought I would be designing for and now design for, then you're sustainable now. You're going to survive into the next phase of whatever it is you're doing, and can evolve with a knowledge base and having kept your lights on. So that's what's most important in the arts in general, I think, is surviving.
Yes, survive and thrive. Well, thanks again,
Survive
Skye,
and
for
thrive.
well, thanks again, Skye, for being a guest on our podcast. If you work in the fashion industry and like to be a guest on my podcast, please reach out.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Skye.